Hey, this is Ben with Blue Ribbon Coalition, and we are here tonight. We are reviewing some elements of the Manti-La Sal Forest Plan. If you follow us on social media, you've probably seen us talking about this plan quite a bit lately. There is a public comment period right now for users of the Manti-La Sal National Forest to come and share their feedback with the Forest Service managers about what they want to see happen for the next 20-30 years of this plan. Simone is on here with us. She's our policy director, and we have Michael Davis. He's the public land policy director for the Utah Snowmobile Association, which kind of gives a little spoiler alert of what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the motorized winter recreation components of this Manti-La Sal Forest Plan. We've talked about the wildfire issues, just basic recreation access. We've talked about dispersed camping. And we know that a lot of our members of Blue Ribbon Coalition are snowmobilers, and our organization does have a pretty strong history of being strong advocates for snowmobile use. We've been diving into this plan and others, and we also just last week filed a challenge, a complaint against a final plan that was released in the Stanislaus National Forest along with some allies in that area. And there are definitely some big concerns on the horizon with the ways the forests are, the direction they're headed in wanting to regulate snowmobile use. And if the snowmobile community doesn't get a whole lot more engaged in working to protect their access to these snowmobile riding areas and trails, we could see situations all across the country, especially in the West, where we have a lot of federal National Forest Service land, where areas where you used to be able to ride are now closed or restricted. And so we wanted to make this video with Michael and go over, we've been sharing notes and having some conversations about some of the elements of this plan and help the users of the Utah Snowmobile Association and our members understand some of the topics they could include in their own public comments. And we need everybody to comment on this plan. We know that some of the wilderness groups and the recreation groups who generally try to advocate against snowmobile use, they have been sending out email alerts and engaging their members to engage on this plan, and so they will show up. We do always monitor who comments on plans like this, and they're very reliable. They do show up. The agencies do consider their concerns, and if we don't show up in equal force and with our own concerns addressed, the default position for the agency would be to just kind of address the concerns that are before them.
And I think
so it is.
Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important for people who aren't familiar with Manti-La Sal National Forest to know how massive this forest is. Lots of people who are familiar with the forest don't realize how large it is, the areas that it covers, great snowmobiling OSV use within these areas. And so chances are, if you have used a snowmobile in Utah, probably in some of these areas. And so we do need to show up and protect access.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah.
Right, and you and I were talking, Michael. You said there's the La Sal's get used, and Simone, do people snowmobile in the Blue Mountains?
Yep, I've been snowmobiling on those mountains, okay. And so this hits close to home. Lots of people will snowmobile up to their cabins, and so this will affect every region within the national forest.
Right. So this is, if you do snowmobile in Utah, there's high likelihood these are areas you've already been, and if you haven't been, you should go because they're spectacular riding areas. And so we've been exchanging notes. We've had some emails. We've had some good phone conversations, Michael, and we've dug in a little bit into some of the more granular elements of this plan, and as we had our discussion, we kind of came to the conclusion, you know what, it'd be nice if a lot of our users and our members knew about, could hear this conversation. And so we've had some back and forth, and so let's dive in and kind of share some of the things we've had discussions about, and let our members and supporters and followers know some of the things that they ought to be concerned about, so they can submit substantive, helpful public comments and make sure our voices get heard. Yeah, and I think we can be a force for good and help the forest shape this plan in a good direction for us. One of the points I sent you, we've had some back and forth, and I sent this to you because it was connected to a conversation we had. There's one of the bullet points we discussed is that in the plan it says high quality motorized winter recreation opportunities are provided, including winter use parking in high use areas, and non-motorized winter recreation areas provide for quiet winter recreation opportunities where designated. And the reason I wanted to bring that one up with you is forest planners like to think that the snowmobilers and the motorized people is all one group, and the quiet users, the backcountry skiers and such, are all one group. Is that what you see happening out in the actual landscape, or do you find that sometimes there's a lot of crossover between the two groups? Yeah.
So the Forest Service needs to recognize that. They need to recognize that there is overlap. They're not two separate groups. And motorized users aren't trying to restrict access for non-motorized users. And so there needs to be a mutual respect and understanding from the Forest Service of that.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. Yeah, and so I think the point you raise, if you are one of these users that does enjoy both motorized recreation access in the winter on a snowmobile or something like that. And you also do the other backcountry activities like skiing. Your voice isn't going to get heard in this plan because there is a small vocal minority who believes that backcountry skiing can only be enjoyed if it's quiet and there aren't motorized use out there. I don't think there are a lot who share that view, and they show up to these meetings and they are going to make sure their voice gets heard. But I think there is a pretty big middle of the road group that does both. And if you're one of those who does both, this plan is not reflecting your interest. And so I think that's a point you should raise, is that high quality winter recreation opportunities need to recognize that in many cases motorized users and non-motorized users are sometimes the same users.
And we can coexist.
And we can coexist. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's the other point, is sometimes the nature of the use itself kind of helps dissipate whatever user conflicts could get created by having so many different user types on the landscape. You said that you guys do a lot of coordination. The Utah Snowmobile Association has a great relationship with the Department of Natural Resources, and you guys help maintain a lot of the trails. You are involved in the grooming of trails. I know there's a lot of that parking becomes an issue, and your groups have probably helped mitigate those problems. And there's a section of this plan where they talk about the forest values that. They actually want you to coordinate. They want the forest to coordinate with state, county, and municipal governments and volunteer groups. And if I understand correctly, I believe, if not Utah Snowmobile Association directly, or many of your groups that are members of your organization, they do this work, like plowing the trailheads, providing trail grooming. Like, explain to a lot of snowmobilers might not know the work you guys do to make this sport accessible and doable for them. I mean, what are some of the things you guys do there? Yeah, and I want to, and that's an important that's important that money is getting allocated to this. And I want to explain why, because this is another thing that the plan doesn't quite recognize to the extent that I think it should, and that your users should advocate for this. It's that once we start using that public money, these are state dollars. They work through the state government. And so now the state of Utah, through its agencies, is investing in these trail facilities, the trails themselves. And so that increases the level of public interest in these roads and trails and areas. And I believe once the Forest Service has created that cooperative relationship with a state agency like that, then those areas should kind of be off limits to future closures, because so many other public investments have been made. It almost starts to function like an easement or an RS-2477 road or something, where the jurisdiction on that is now split between another government. And we'll find that in this plan there are some places where the Forest Service is trying to kind of hard code into the system that there will be inevitable closures of roads and trails and things. This could be an opportunity where they actually hard code into the system that if the state, county, municipal governments, and volunteer groups are investing time, volunteer effort, and money into maintaining these things, that should dramatically reduce the risk that area would ever be considered for any form of closure. It should make it ineligible for any form of a wilderness or primitive designation. And those are things we could say in our comments, is just say we do enjoy these trails. We recognize our state government's investing a lot in them. And for that reason, they should be permanently left open. And Simone, if someone wants to comment,
if they want to comment, they can. It's very easy. They go to sharedtrails.org. We've got an action alert. We've got text written up already that they can use. We encourage people to put in their own comments, such as something like this, their own experiences, and we make it really easy for them to submit a comment. So you have until the 25th of October, which is a Monday.
Yeah. So we've tried to make that really easy. Like, I don't want anybody to not comment because they didn't go find some buried page on the Forest Service website and have to read through a whole plan, which takes hours to really digest it. So we've tried to pick out the most relevant parts to who our users are and supporters. But some of the things we're talking about here today, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take some of the things we've discussed, put them in your own words, and add them into that form comment we've created. Because agencies, sometimes when they get a form comment, they'll just kind of discount that and say, oh, we got another form comment. But if you customize it and include some of your own feedback and language, it's a good way to make your comment stand out a little more and make them consider it on its own terms instead of as just part of a big group of other comments. Simone, you're probably like the person, probably of the people I know, you've spent more time looking at the recreation opportunity spectrum zones in this plan. Mm-hmm. And this is I always tell people, and I've told Michael this, that sometimes these administrative processes are designed to repel normal people from wanting to understand them. They use really technical jargon. And they kind of, if you don't spend a lot of time researching these things, and even like someone like me, I spend a lot of time doing it, and I'll still find stuff like, how is this even working? But you've looked at the recreation opportunity spectrum
Which they refer to as just ROS. So if you happen to read the plan and you see ROS, that's what that means.
But help the snowmobile crowd understand what that is a little bit, because in my mind that's where the skis hit the snow. I mean, that is, if we're going to lose access to areas, it'll be through how they designate things into this recreation opportunity spectrum. And I want to make sure Michael and his supporters all understand what this is.
So they go through and they look at the different areas, and they will designate these zones, these spectrums, and from rural and roaded, which means they're allowing roads and trails, all the way to primitive, non-motorized, and primitive motorized. So there's several different classifications that they'll make. And if they designate something as non-motorized, which the majority of the areas are, then, I mean, that part is self-explanatory. There will be no motorized use in those areas. They'll close roads, they'll close trails if they designate a specific area as non-motorized. And so it's important to pay attention to the plan, and we're working on that and looking at the maps. There are areas that they are proposing to be non-motorized that I know there are roads and trails within. And so it is concerning for anybody who uses motorized vehicles, whether it's snowmobiles or not, to be aware of those areas that they're going to try to designate. And over snow vehicles will also get closed off too if we're not careful and if we don't comment.
And I do want to explain how that'll work. So in a forest plan, they'll designate, this is almost like zoning at a county level, like where you zone something commercial or zone it residential, or this is where, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so we're in the scoping, and so they have some preliminary maps that they want us to look at, and those are on our website. If you go to our action alert at sharetrails.org, go to updates, you'll scroll through and see we have a Manti-La Sal action alert. And we have the maps. The maps that are provided are the quality of them, to really get down into like the weeds of what's open and what's closed, is kind of a... I don't know that the maps are the greatest tool for that, but you can at least see in a quick snapshot if something is the wrong color. If it's that semi-primitive, non-motorized, or primitive, and that's an area where you like to ride, or you know there's trails there, or whatever, you need to let the Forest Service know that. And you can ask the Forest Service for better maps and more information. And it would be helpful for you to do that. Call them up. Say, hey, why is this designated this way? I use this area, and I think you've made a mistake. This is the right time in the process to tell them that. The next iteration, they might fix that if we bring it to their attention. But the forest plan itself, will just make the designation. When the closure happens, is all the forests are now being required through a 2015 update of their rules to create plans for over snow vehicle travel, which is our snowmobiles. And most forests haven't done it yet. The timing of when they have to is kind of left open-ended, but the forests in California have. And this is where they went through that process. And the one that I mentioned at the beginning, that we're involved in a legal action that's just in the very preliminary stage. I mean, the complaint has been filed. There was a loss of 66% of the riding area in this forest. And if you look at some of the reasons of how they justified it, they created arbitrary snow depth requirements. They created arbitrary elevation level requirements. Once we get the response from the Forest Service, we'll want to talk a lot more in depth about what's involved in that lawsuit, because we want the community to understand it. But what you need to know here is if the plan sets the stage for closure, once we get to that point where the Forest Service is completing their required OSV travel plan, that's where the hammer will fall, and we will see a lot of closures if we haven't set the stage correctly at this point. And so you are correct that this plan process itself will be several more steps. But then even once it's completed, there will be a whole separate planning process just for travel. And that is the one where it could really end up closing a lot of things. If groups like us weren't involved in this, that it would be game over. If users that are listening to this don't go make a comment, you weaken our efforts. And so we really just need everybody to get united around this effort. It's not the funnest part of the sport of snowmobiling,
but it's necessary.
But unfortunately, because of what's happening out there, it's becoming absolutely necessary. Yeah, and let me read one more bullet point out of this plan that shows that I'm not just making this up. There was a point we've talked about back and forth where they say dispersed sites, areas, that's our riding areas, the travel routes, those are the routes, should be closed, either permanently or seasonally, when high risk of damage to cultural, aquatic, or wildlife resources occurs, or user conflicts or health and safety are compromised. I told you they should just strike that from the plan. Like, that is a horrible, horrible statement.
Well, it says that what's funny to me is that if health and safety are compromised, and anybody could use that, they could say, oh, well, any motorized use that could affect health and safety, so let's close it off. I mean, it's such a vague, open statement that it should just be taken out of the plan, because that's going to set a poor precedent.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's take wildlife for instance. We are, like, I tell people this and they just roll their eyes at me, but it's true. We're really fighting over whether snowmobiling affects hibernating endangered frogs. I mean, these are frogs that are hibernating underground in the middle of the winter under 12 feet of snow. And we're having to analyze whether this is impacting these hibernating amphibians. A hibernating amphibian is about as close to dead as you can be and still be a living animal. And I just don't think the snowmobilies, they're not impacting the hibernating frogs. I'd love to see the science, but if that is the standard, if we find an impact to wildlife, then it should be closed either permanently or seasonally. Then you've basically given 8 different ways that a group that wants to get rid of snowmobiling can come and advocate for a closure, and there are already laws that do protect these things. Like the Endangered Species Act, NEPA, and other things do create processes for if there are impacts to wildlife or aquatic resources or cultural resources, that those get analyzed at a different point. But to sort of require or hard code a potential closure into the forest plan for those things is unnecessary. And Simone will often hear me say we need to promote management of public land through management. Land managers sometimes want to manage land through closure, because once they close it, they don't have to manage it anymore. There's almost always a management solution to an impact that is better than the closure is, and that's the challenge. It's not the easy solution, but there's always going to be a solution, and that's where groups like ours and yours need to show up and help the agency see those solutions. But we can't let them get away with this, what I call the hard coding of closure into the plan. They
give several different reasons why those areas should be closed without giving the same amount of reasons of why those areas should be kept open. And so, I mean, if nothing else, they need to at least be showing both sides.
Exactly. And so